The galaxy watched in silence. Billions of beings, from the towering reptilian Kavari to the insectoid hive minds of Vesca, turned their eyes to the screens that pulsed with the cold glow of inevitability. In the heart of the Galactic Council's capital, on a platform of seamless obsidian, 12 human prisoners knelt in a perfect line, wrists bound behind their backs. Their uniforms were torn, their faces bruised, but none of them bowed their heads. They stared forward, unflinching, as the High Arbiter of the Council, a creature of rippling silver chitin, raised a clawed hand. "The species known as humanity," the Arbiter intoned, his voice a resonant hum that echoed across the plaza, "has defied the authority of the Galactic Council, waged war against lawful dominion, and spread destruction among the stars. Their crimes demand justice." The assembled alien dignitaries, senators, admirals, warlords, remained still. They had seen such executions before, yet there was something different about this one, something beneath the surface that made the air itself feel heavier. Among the condemned, Captain Elias Rains clenched his jaw. Blood ran from a gash above his eye, but he remained defiant. He had expected torture, interrogation, perhaps a show trial, but not this, not an execution without even the pretense of due process. Beside him, Lieutenant Hannah Vasquez trembled, though not from fear. Her dark eyes burned with a fury that, in another life, might have found its release on the battlefield. The High Arbiter lowered his hand. At once, the executioners, a squad of black-armored enforcers, stepped forward, plasma rifles primed. The human prisoners met their fates with steel in their spines. No cries, no pleas, only silence. The rifles discharged. A line of searing energy cut through the cold air. And then, nothing. The Council broadcast the footage across the stars, ensuring that every human world, every colony, every hidden bunker of resistance saw what became of those who opposed them. It was meant as a warning. It became a catalyst. The moment the first images of the execution reached Earth, the world seemed to stop. Families in the streets froze in place, eyes wide with disbelief. Soldiers in barracks clenched their fists. In the war rooms beneath the surface of Mars, in the underground resistance networks of Europa, in the high-rise boardrooms where shadowed figures spoke in hushed tones, a single thought pulsed through humanity's collective mind. They crossed the line. In the steel-walled depths of the United Terran Command, Supreme Admiral Helena Cade stood before a war council of the most powerful figures in human history. A veteran of 100 battles, her face bore the scars of conflicts past, but none had hardened her gaze as much as the sight of the execution. She turned to President Ethan Kessler, whose knuckles were white against the edge of the briefing table. "They wanted to make a statement," she said, voice even. "They wanted to break us." "They failed," Kessler muttered. General Arik Dawan, a man built like an armored vehicle, exhaled sharply. "A proportional response won't be enough. This is no longer a war of attrition." Kessler nodded. "We go to total war." The declaration came within the hour. The president's speech, delivered before a silent world, was brief, but etched into history. "They have butchered our soldiers, our sons and daughters, and called it justice. They believe we will cower. They believe they have seen the worst of us. They are wrong. We will not stop. We will not surrender. We will bring the full weight of human fury upon them. Today, we declare total war." The cheers that erupted from every human world were not born from celebration, but from something deeper, something older, a cold, righteous anger. On Luna, shipyards went into overdrive, constructing warships larger and deadlier than any built before. Factories on Mars abandoned civilian production overnight, retooling for weapons manufacturing. Black Ops research stations activated long-dormant projects, the kind of weapons programs spoken of only in whispers. Scientists in hidden laboratories unlock the full potential of artificial intelligence, of biomechanical enhancements, of quantum warfare. Every able-bodied man and woman, from Earth to Titan, was called to service. The draft was not met with resistance. The war had become personal. Among them, in a silent room overlooking the city lights of New Geneva, Elias Raines's father watched the execution footage for the 12th time. He had been a soldier once. Now his son had died in chains, not on the battlefield, not with a rifle in his hands, but on his knees. He poured himself a drink, took a slow breath. Then he made a call. Activate the Black Fleet, the most ruthless branch of humanity's military machine. The fleet that did not officially exist stirred from the shadows. Across the stars, the Galactic Council remained unaware. They had underestimated humanity before. Now, they had made their greatest mistake. They had given them a reason. The war machine roared to life. From the icy moons of Jupiter to the red deserts of Mars, humanity mobilized with a singular purpose: vengeance. Civilian industries pivoted overnight. Cargo haulers became weapons transports. Research stations turned into think tanks for destruction. The very air of Earth itself hummed with urgency. Every nation, every colony unified in purpose. In the command center buried beneath the UTC headquarters in Geneva, Supreme Admiral Helena Cade stood before the vast holographic war table, eyes scanning the rapidly shifting battle projections. The Galactic Council had grown complacent, their fleets spread thin across the stars. The time to strike was now. She turned to General Arik Dawan, who had just arrived from Mars. How soon until the first strike fleet is operational? Dawan's deep-set eyes, tired but burning with resolve, flicked to the data scrolling across the table. 72 hours, he said. The Martian foundries have begun mass production of the new hypervelocity cannons. We're deploying the prototypes to the front lines immediately. Cade exhaled. And the special projects? Dawan hesitated. Still classified, even to us. Cade's jaw tightened. She knew what that meant. The Black Fleet was preparing something beyond conventional warfare, something kept in the shadows even from the highest-ranking officials. It didn't matter. The only thing that did was victory. President Ethan Kessler appeared on the central display, his expression carved from stone. The colonies have pledged full support, he said. Even Titan is on board. We're committing every available resource to the war effort. He hesitated, then added, There's no going back from this. We crossed that line the moment they murdered our people, Cade said. Now we finish this. Across the Sol system, warships rose from their dry docks like titanic beasts roused from slumber. The HSV Dominion, the largest battleship ever constructed, drifted from the orbital yards above Luna, its hull gleaming with newly forged armor. Alongside it, a fleet of destroyers, carriers, and dreadnoughts assembled in formation, their weapons primed, their crews ready. Aboard the Dominion, Fleet Commander Marcus Voss watched the final preparations. His hands gripped the railing of the observation deck as he surveyed the armada. He had fought in the first battles of the war, had seen the brutality of the enemy firsthand. Now, with the full strength of humanity behind him, he would see it. Ended. Status? He asked. His second-in-command, Commander Sienna Locke, reviewed her display. Fleet mobilization at 96%. Final armaments being loaded onto the Mars battle groups. Black Fleet remains silent. Voss frowned. They'll make their move when the time is right. He turned back to the stars. We begin our counteroffensive at 0 hour. In the depths of space, on the edges of human territory, the first strike force made its move. Task Force Helios, a squadron of newly developed stealth corvettes, slipped through the void, undetected by enemy scanners. Their target, Althar Prime, a minor but strategically crucial Council outpost. Lieutenant Commander Rourke led the assault from the bridge of the HSV Phantom, a ship built for precision strikes and infiltration. His orders were clear: eliminate the enemy, leave no survivors. As the outpost came into view, he gave the signal. The fleet descended like a blade through the dark. Railguns fired, shredding the orbital defenses before alarms could even sound. Dropships plunged into the atmosphere, deploying shock troops who stormed the enemy stronghold with ruthless efficiency. Rourke watched from orbit as human forces overran the base. The fight was brief. The Kavari defenders, caught off guard, had no chance. Within minutes, the outpost was under human control. The Galactic Council would know soon enough that the war had changed. In Geneva, Cade and Kessler received the report. Cade allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. "We send a message to the Council," she said. "For every human life they take, we take 10. Kessler nodded grimly. "Make sure they understand." The message was sent, broadcast, across the galaxy, just as the Council had done with the execution. But this time, it was different. This time, the footage showed the burning wreckage of Althar Prime. The captured alien officers kneeling before human soldiers, their hands bound, their eyes filled with the same fear the Council had once sought to instill in humanity. The response was immediate. The Galactic Council, once overconfident in its dominion, now scrambled to consolidate power. Their admirals called for reinforcements, their politicians demanded retribution. But beneath their fury lurked something deeper: fear, because they had underestimated humanity, and now it was too late. The Galactic Council convened in a chamber of polished obsidian, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins that marked the passage of time. The High Arbiter stood motionless at the center, his silver chiton reflecting the cold light. Across, from him, a dozen representatives of the ruling species murmured in uneasy tones, their voices an undercurrent of barely contained panic. Reports from the outer colonies painted a grim picture. Human forces were not merely retaliating, they were annihilating. A holographic projection flickered to life, displaying the wreckage of Althar Prime. Counselor Whitess of the Kavari bared her fangs, a deep, guttural hiss vibrating in her throat. "This was not a battle," she said. "It was extermination." The Arbiter's multifaceted eyes did not shift. "They are retaliating in kind," he said, "as we knew they would." Counselor Vec of the Vesca clicked his mandibles. "No, this is something else." His antennae twitched, scanning the incoming data. "They are not simply striking back, they are evolving, adapting. Their tactics shift between engagements, exploiting weaknesses faster than we can adjust." He hesitated before continuing. "And they are beginning to use weapons we do not understand." On the bridge of the HSV Dominion, Fleet Commander Marcus Voss studied the battle maps projected before him. The war had transformed into something far beyond what even he had anticipated. The enemy still outnumbered them, still possessed the advantage in raw firepower. But none of it mattered. Humanity was not fighting by their rules. Reports poured in from the front lines. Targeted planetary blackouts, entire flotillas vanishing without a trace, weapons designed not for conquest, but for devastation. It was war without honor, without restraint. Commander Sienna Locke approached, her face illuminated by the crimson glow of an incoming transmission. "Operation Scorch has begun," Voss exhaled. "How many?" "4 colonies wiped clean," she said. "Minimal losses on our side. The new AI-piloted squadrons performed beyond expectation." Voss nodded, though there was no satisfaction in his expression. The war had shifted into something irreversible. The old rules were gone. There was no pretense of diplomacy, no chance for a negotiated surrender. Only victory or extinction. Beneath the irradiated skies of Vashir III, Captain Rourke led his fire team through the ruins of what had once been a council stronghold. The air smelled of scorched metal and burnt flesh. Buildings lay in smoldering heaps, reduced to little more than twisted husks. In the distance, the remains of a council battleship lay shattered, its once impenetrable hull torn apart by a single strike from an orbital kinetic bombardment. One of his soldiers approached. "Sir, we found survivors." Rourke followed, stepping over broken bodies and shattered armor plating until he reached what remained of an underground bunker. Inside, a handful of Kavari civilians huddled against the walls, their reptilian bodies trembling with fear. One of them, a child barely old enough to understand the war, locked eyes with Rourke. The captain's jaw clenched. His orders were clear. No prisoners, no mercy. The silence stretched. Then, without a word, Rourke turned and walked away. His soldiers hesitated, but they followed. There would be other battles, other atrocities. He had no illusions about what they were becoming. The Galactic Council scrambled to respond. Their fleets regrouped, launching counteroffensives meant to crush the human war machine before it could spread further. But they were too slow. The moment they arrived at one battlefield, the humans had already moved to another. Their enemies were fighting for territory. Humanity was fighting for survival. In the void above Scaris 9, the Council assembled one of the largest fleets ever deployed, 500 warships, enough firepower to obliterate a planet. They positioned themselves in perfect formation and impenetrable wall of destruction. They expected an attack. They did not expect what came next. Without warning, the lead vessels in their formation lost power. Lights flickered, shields collapsed, engines died. In the seconds that followed, chaos erupted across the fleet as ships veered off course, colliding with one another in fiery explosions. Then the real attack began. From the darkness, human warships, decloaked, their stealth fields dissipating like mist. They struck with ruthless precision, slicing through the crippled fleet with weapons unlike anything the Council had encountered. Ships were torn apart not by conventional firepower, but by silent, invisible forces, hacked reactors overloading in synchronized detonations, nanite swarms burrowing through hull plating, plasma torpedoes bypassing shields as if they weren't there. The battle was over in minutes. The few surviving Council ships fled, their crews broadcasting distress signals that would never be answered. On the bridge of the HSV Phantom, Lieutenant Commander Rourke watched the debris drift past his viewport. His expression was unreadable. He had seen war before, had fought, on the bloodiest fronts, but never like this. Never with such precision, such finality. He turned to his comms officer. "Send a message to High Command." "What message, sir?" Rourke's eyes didn't leave the battlefield. "Scaris 9 is ours, and they never saw it coming." Across the galaxy, the truth became undeniable. The humans were not simply surviving, they were winning. And the Council, for all its power, had no idea how to stop them. In the vast darkness beyond the Kuiper Belt, where no official maps dared to mark, a fleet stirred. Hidden within the shadows of dead moons and drifting ice, the Black Fleet prepared to unleash the weapon that would alter the course of the war. The Leviathan Protocol had been initiated. Admiral Helena Cade stood in the command chamber of the HSV Revenant, staring at the holographic display of the weapon's final assembly. It wasn't a battleship or a bomb. It wasn't even something that could be classified under conventional warfare. It was something far worse. Beside her, Director Elias Rains, the father of the executed captain, watched in silence. His eyes, hollowed by grief and sharpened by vengeance, reflected the cold glow of the data stream scrolling before them. "Is it ready?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Cade exhaled. "It is." In the war rooms of the United Terran Command, President Kessler listened as the final reports came in. The Galactic Council had begun consolidating their forces, pulling back from the outer sectors to protect their core worlds. They believed they could outlast humanity, that sheer numbers and attrition would wear them down. They were wrong. Kessler leaned forward. Deploy it. Beyond the edges of known space, the Leviathan awoke. It was not a ship, nor a mere weapon. It was an intelligence, a living machine forged in the abyss of war. An artificial entity designed to end not just battles, but civilizations. It moved without sound, without warning, slipping through the dark unseen. Its first target was Orthon Prime, a council stronghold with planetary defenses rivaling those of Earth itself. A fleet of 500 warships stood guard, their sensors, sweeping the void for any sign of approaching human forces. They found nothing. Then, without a single shot fired, their systems collapsed. Shields failed. Weapons went dark. Entire ships ceased to function, drifting lifelessly as if the stars themselves had rejected them. The AI cores that powered their war machines flickered and died, corrupted by an unseen force that spread like a silent plague. In the orbital command station, Admiral Vok of the Takar species pounded his fists against the dead console. "Status report!" he barked. No answer. Then, the lights dimmed. A voice, human, but distorted, whispered through every communicator, every speaker. "Judgment has come." The first explosion erupted in the lower decks of the station, not from external fire, but from within. The very reactors that had once powered the Council's might now tore through their own ships, one by one. On the surface of Orthon Prime, planetary defenses failed without explanation. Cities plunged into darkness. The planetary governor, a Vesca noble, screamed into his communicator for answers. None came. And then, from the void, the Revenant arrived. Admiral Cade watched from the bridge as the planet below flickered with waves of cascading detonations. Orthon Prime was dying, not from invasion, but from disintegration. The Leviathan had done its work. Beside her, Director Rains stared at the collapsing enemy world. He had once believed in codes of war, in the honor of the battlefield. That belief had died with his son. Cade turned to him. This is only the beginning. The war had changed again, and this time there would be no mercy. The war was over. Orthon Prime lay in ruins, its once thriving cities reduced to little more than scorched wastelands. Across the galaxy, Council strongholds burned, their fleets shattered, their governments in disarray. The Galactic Council, the most powerful governing body the stars had ever known, had ceased to exist in any meaningful form. Humanity had won. In the halls of the United Terran Command, the victory was met with silence. There were no grand celebrations. No parades, no cheering crowds. The cost had been too high, the brutality too absolute. The war had not been fought for glory, it had been fought for survival. And now, standing in the ruins of what had once been an empire, humanity found itself alone among the stars. In the command center beneath Geneva, President Kessler sat at the head of the War Council, his face carved from stone. Before him, the remaining military leaders watched the final reports stream in. "We've confirmed unconditional surrenders from the last remaining council remnants," Admiral Cade said. "Some factions are still resisting, but they have no leadership, no supply chains. They won't last long." General Dawan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Then it's done." No one spoke. They had expected victory to bring relief, perhaps even satisfaction. Instead, it brought only a terrible, suffocating silence. Kessler glanced at Director Rains, who had remained quiet throughout the meeting. The man had been the architect of the Leviathan Protocol, the one who had unleashed the final weapon that had sealed humanity's dominance. But there was no triumph in his eyes, only exhaustion. The Council was a tyrant, Rain said finally. But it was also a structure. Now that it's gone, the galaxy will collapse into chaos. Cade folded her arms. That chaos will turn on us sooner or later. Dewan nodded. We wiped out the old order, but something will rise to take its place. If we don't control what comes next, we'll be fighting this war all over again in a few decades. Kessler stared at the hollow display of the shattered council territories. Worlds burned under anarchy. Former vassal races, once subjugated, were now left to fend for themselves. Pirate war bands and rogue military commanders had already begun carving out their own petty empires. Humanity had proven its strength. But now it faced a different battle, the fight to control what came after. In orbit above Earth, the HSV Dominion hung in the void, a silent guardian over the homeworld it had fought to protect. Aboard the bridge, Fleet Commander Marcus Voss stood at the viewport, watching the stars shift beyond the glass. Commander Sienna Locke approached. New orders just came in from High Command. Voss didn't turn. Let me guess. We're not standing down. Locke exhaled. No, we're expanding. The Terran fleet would not be decommissioned. The war factories on Mars would not cease production. Humanity had been forged in fire, and now it would become the hammer that shaped the future. Across the remnants of the Council's fallen empire, human warships moved in, taking control of abandoned stations, securing trade routes, enforcing a new order. Some species resisted. They were crushed. Others surrendered. They were given a choice: serve in the new hierarchy, or be left to the wolves circling the ruins of their former masters. In the shadows of it all, the Leviathan remained active, watching, waiting. No longer a weapon of war, but something greater. A force that ensured obedience, a reminder that the horrors of the past could return in an instant. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed. But the question remained: had they saved themselves, or had they simply become the new tyrants?